speech disability. And God is like, no. God even gets angry, like, no, you're the leader we need, and you shouldn't, their speech disability shouldn't take away from that. And it really, but just the whole people, all the people who are basically changing the world and creating a story that's going to be for thousands of years are all enslaved, and people who are really treated like they're worthless. And God is like, no, you're worth everything. You're my people. I love you. You deserve to be free. So how do we kind of apply that and learn from that for today, and how might that apply to our societies today?
I mean, as an allegorical story on that level, it's definitely a story about how the kind of, not to use a Christian or more Christian allegory type words, but the meek shall inherit the earth. This is definitely a story of the little guy beat the big guy. Pharaoh was Pharaoh, and he had all of his magicians and his advisors. And when Moses did each of his miracles, he performed these miracles that Hashem allowed him to perform. And there's actually a midrash that I was just listening to a podcast on, where Pharaoh kind of went to his advisors and his magicians and said, well, can you do this too? And at first they were like, yeah, we can do that. We can bring darkness. We can turn water, well, maybe not to blood, but we can make it red. And then the plagues continued and the miracles continued. And at one point they were like, yeah, we can't do this. So Pharaoh had all this power and had all these resources, but he couldn't stop Moses, who, he was this abandoned child in a basket, taken in by royalty, certainly, but of slave lineage, with a speech impediment. Not exactly the leader that you might have imagined. We're not thinking like strong, buff, burly man, well-spoken, super handsome, everyone swoons. And he's also a reluctant leader. He's not sure he can do it. And God says, yeah, you can do it. I'm going to give you the motivation, the power, and you, Moses, are going to be able to defeat Pharaoh, this guy who runs an empire. And then you're going to be able to lead your own empire. You're going to be able to lead these people out of slavery through the wilderness, 40 years, and bring them to a new home. So it's a super inspiring story that way. And yeah, it definitely has a lot of female protagonists who kind of rock. They do, without Miriam, the people would have no water to drink. In the desert, that's kind of crucial. And I don't see it as a side note that she's the one who's bringing the life-saving water. It's a big deal. And if it wasn't for Miriam, first of all, there's a midrash that says Moses wouldn't even have been born, because so I should even say, right, midrashes they're kind of like extra stories about the text. So they're not necessarily in the Torah, but they are like extra stories to help explain things that happen in the Torah. So one of the midrashes says that when Moses' parents heard about the decree that the baby boys would all be killed, so the Jewish baby boys were condemned to die, and they weren't so cool about necessarily having another child that might die. And the story goes that Miriam was the one who encouraged them to still have another kid, to risk it. It's Miriam who helps follow the basket with the baby Moses in it and follows it all the way down the river, and comes across Pharaoh's daughter, who takes it from the river. And she doesn't just watch, she even goes up to Pharaoh's daughter and she says, hey, I know somebody who could feed this baby. There's a wet nurse that I could bring right now. And she brings her mom. So, Miriam is integral to this story. Some Jewish people, my family certainly does, we actually put out a cup for her now. Modern Seders, I think, are doing more to start acknowledging the marginalized people, the marginalized within the marginalized. I think when I was growing up, I don't know if I heard a lot about how Moses had a speech impediment and couldn't needed Aaron as his mouthpiece to help address the people. But like, what an inspiring story for people who stutter or have other disabilities and think, because of this, I can't be the leader. And this story actually tells us, no, you absolutely can be. And in more recent years, there's been more inclusion of women and kind of bringing them back to the story. So yes, we leave out a cup of water for Miriam, which is representative of the well that she brought, next to Elijah's cup, which is filled with wine. Did I answer the question?
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yep.
I love what you said. It really resonates. I know definitely for me, being woman with a disability, and I'm autistic, and I've been in speech therapy and kind of grappled with it, and gift wonderful. Zoom has removed our 40-minute time limit. Perfect. Yep. Thank you, Zoom. Anyhow, being autistic, and I've grappled with speech therapy and maybe I'll record a whole podcast episode on that because it's complicated and interesting and sometimes kind of difficult, but it's really amazing to see that in one tradition there was really such respect for women and for people with disabilities and for everybody. It's just like every person, and it's not like there's a line in the Torah where it's I think Deuteronomy, where it's like, oh, all of you, from the leaders of your tribe to the people who hew the wood and draw the water, you're all standing together before Hashem. And the point is, like, maybe normally society would say, oh, some of you aren't so important, but you're here and God sees you and God speaks to you, all of you equally. So it's definitely beautiful to see that, and you definitely did a great job telling us about that and what it means and how it plays out in modern Judaism. So thank you. Well done. Thank you. Perfect. Let's see. So Pesach is also about it's the first recorded story, I think, of anti-Semitic persecution, where the Pharaoh is like, oh, look at these Jews. There's too many of them. They're not loyal enough. Still kill that one a lot 3,000 years later. And so he does that. And that leads to slavery and leads to him trying to murder the babies even and destroy the whole people. But ultimately, the story is not that the anti-Semites win. The story is that they're defeated and we're liberated from it. And that's the beginning of an amazing story for the Jewish people. And like you said, an amazing story for everybody, an amazing example and an amazing vision for the whole world. And 3,000 years later, after it's still, all that anti-Semitism is still there. It's still a big problem. There was a ADL survey I saw recently. Shout out to my V. Judah Kaken for his work on this, and it found that almost 1 in 10 Jewish Americans have been physically attacked by anti-Semites, and more than 1/5 have been harassed. So it's pretty bad. So what is one piece of advice you'd give to anyone who wants to stand up and help get to a point where Jews and society in general, because anti-Semitism is an attack on democratic society. So what would you say to help us stand up and become free from this sort of bigotry?
I would say that, Jews can't do it alone. So to me, one of the key things to fighting anti-Semitism is understanding anti-Semitism, understanding how old some of these messages are. Like you said, all the way back 3,000 years ago in Exodus, we have a leader looking out at his people and saying, there are just too many Jews. And saying, they haven't done anything to me specifically, but like, what if they did? And then deciding, because he was concerned that maybe they would potentially do something bad and they were different from him, he was going to enslave, oppress, and kill off all the baby boys. Basically, it was really the first attempt at genocide of Jews, because the idea of killing off baby boys is boys, if there are not men to fight, then they can't fight against the power. And there was this idea that you could kind of breed out the Jews by making sure that the women can't sleep with other Jewish men, and then no more Jews. And again, this was maybe the first recorded incident of this, but it has continued to happen again and again and again throughout history. The joke is that the majority, or there's a lot of Jewish holidays that can be summed up as they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. And it's unfortunate that that is the case. And it's unfortunate that we're still doing it today. So, as I said, I think one of the things is to understand anti-Semitic tropes, understand how old they are, understand how to recognize them, and then to speak out against them. So if you hear somebody saying, oh, well, you know, those Jews have so much money, this is an anti-Semitic trope. It goes back to, again, this fear that Jews are outsiders and have too much power, too much wealth, and that somehow that's dangerous to everybody else in society. It's also not true. Historically, if you look back, Jews were typically made to live in these very small, isolated, and non-economically advantaged communities. Ghetto actually comes from Jews being forced into small areas of cities in Europe. And that's just a reality. So I think the only way to fight against it is to speak out against it, and to try to pick away at some of these very old tropes and dangerous ideas that then end up getting Jews hurt. When words are not words anymore, but somebody decides to attack based on the perception they have of Jews, that's when people tend to pay attention, when somebody is killed or assaulted. But the moments before are actually what's key in stopping that from happening. The moments to stop anti-Semitism is not when a shooter goes into a temple with a gun. The moments would be before that, when that same shooter was convinced that Jews were letting illegal brown people into the country through a group called HIAS, which is actually just a Jewish organization that helps out immigrants, because we've been immigrants and it was just designed to help different people. But, you know, that specific incident I'm talking about, the Tree of Life shooting, but that person was radicalized to believe that Jews were a threat to the society in a very similar way that Pharaoh thousands of years ago believed that Jews were a threat to his society. So it's on Jews to help educate their friends and like call out when they hear anti-Semitic tropes and not just let it go, not just laugh it off. And it's on their friends and allies to learn those tropes and start calling them out when they hear them. Because it's often that Jews are not around when people start throwing out the anti-Semitic tropes, because they know that they're wrong, but when there's no Jews around, they think that there'll be no one to say anything about them. So for friends and allies, we appreciate the help.
Very well said. Thank you. And I'll definitely second that. We do appreciate that, and it's good because people are like, there's an assumption. I think every bigot does this. They assume, well, you're not part of whatever group we're going after, so you'll be fine. It's okay. We can do what we want, because they assume that people are going to just ignore it as long as it's not directly targeted at them. And when you break that assumption, they kind of changes like crazy, and the bigotry doesn't go so far. So break it. It's just, we're all, every person is worth the trouble and worth making your conversation a little uncomfortable, just because it's not directly at you. It's still wrong. It's against people who are valuable, and it's against the democratic society we're all trying to have. Like, we're not gonna anti-Semitism and democracy does not go well. And
totally. And also, you know, a lot of people say anti-Semitism is a canary in the coal mine. It tends to come early in the rise of a bunch of different types of racism and oppression and hate towards marginalized people. They're not, you know, different types of hate towards marginalized people, they don't stand on their own. Somebody who hates one person likely hates a lot of other people too. And marginalized communities can be so much stronger when we stand up for each other. So I will also say that.
That's right. the right thing to do, and that's how, like, if you want, that's how stuff changes when people like